On a quiet autumn afternoon, 73-year-old James Mitchell spots a stranded luxury car on Route 27. It's the kind of car he'd never been able to afford during his decades as a small-town mechanic, but engines are engines, and helping people is what he does. The woman behind the wheel, Katherine Walsh-Reynolds, built a tech empire worth billions. But today, she's not thinking about her fortune. She's thinking about the boy who taught her about cars 45 years ago, her first love, who disappeared after high school graduation. As James leans over the engine, something about his gentle hands and the way he explains the repairs stirs long-buried memories in Katherine's heart. Every morning for the past 48 years, James Mitchell's alarm clock chimes at exactly 5:30 a.m. He doesn't need it anymore. His body's internal clock usually wakes him a few minutes before. But there's comfort in routine, in the familiar. Electronic buzz that's accompanied him through decades of sunrises. This morning is no different as he swings his legs over the side of his bed, his joints protesting with their usual creaks and pops. The pre-dawn light seeps through his bedroom window, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. His house, a modest two-bedroom craftsman style he bought in 1975, sits on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, far enough from town to have a decent-sized workshop, but close enough that he can still walk to Mary's diner for his morning coffee if he feels like it. James moves through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. A quick shower, a careful shave with his father's old straight razor, and then the daily ritual of dressing for work. Though he's been officially retired for 8 years now, he still puts on his navy blue work shirt with Mitchell's Repairs embroidered over the pocket. The thread is fading, and he should probably order new shirts. But this one fits just right, softened by countless washes and years of honest work. In his kitchen, the coffee maker gurgles to life, filling the room with the rich aroma of dark roast. While it brews, James retrieves his father's toolbox from its place of honor near the back door. The leather is worn smooth in places, cracked in others, telling the story of 2 generations of mechanics. He runs his fingers over the brass nameplate, Henry Mitchell and Son, Auto Repair. His father had added the "and son" part the day James turned 16, though he'd been helping in the shop since he was tall enough to hold a wrench. Inside the toolbox, each tool rests in its designated spot, clean and well-maintained. James checks them every morning, more out of habit than necessity. The weight of the box in his hand is reassuring, a constant in a world that seems to change faster with each passing year. These days, cars are more computer than machine, but the basic principles haven't changed. An engine is still an engine, and problems still need fixing, even if the diagnostics come from a tablet instead of experience and intuition. The walk to Mary's diner takes exactly 12 minutes at his usual pace. The morning air is crisp with autumn's bite and fallen leaves crunch beneath his work boots. Cedar Grove is just beginning to stir. Lights flicking on in houses, early risers backing out of driveways, the distant rumble of the 6:15 freight train that's run through town for as long as anyone can remember. Mary herself is behind the counter when he pushes open the diner's door, setting off the familiar jingle of bells. She's owned the place for 30 years, taking over from her mother who ran it for 40 years before that. The diner is Cedar Grove's living room, its unofficial town hall, and its collective memory all rolled into one. "Morning, James," Mary calls out, already reaching for his usual mug. The usual, "Morning, Mary." "Yes, please." He settles onto his regular stool at the counter, the one that gives him a clear view of both the street and the kitchen. The vinyl seat covering is cracked in places, but it's still the most comfortable spot in town as far as he's concerned. Mary sets his coffee down, black, 2 sugars, along with a fresh buttermilk biscuit. "Made these just before you came in," she says with a wink. "Thought you might want something to go with that coffee." James smiles, warming his hands around the mug. "You're too good to me, Mary." "Nonsense. You fixed my refrigerator last week when it was making that awful noise. Consider us even. The diner slowly fills with its regular morning crowd. Tom Harris, the high school principal, nodding hello as he picks up his daily coffee and bagel. Sarah Chen from the pharmacy, spreading out her newspaper at her usual booth. Bill Thompson, retired postal worker, settling in for his morning routine. Of eggs over easy and local gossip. They all know James. Most of them have for decades. He's fixed their cars, their appliances, their lawnmowers. In a world of disposable everything, James Mitchell is the man who still knows how to make things. Work again? He takes pride in that, in being useful, in keeping the machines of Cedar Grove running smoothly. As he finishes his coffee, Mary refills his cup without asking. Heard Mrs. Peterson's washing machine is acting up again, she mentions casually. Might want to check on her when you have a chance. You know how she hates going to the laundromat. James nods, making a mental note. Mrs. Peterson is 85 and still lives alone in the house she shared with her late husband. Her washing machine is almost as old as she is, but James keeps it running. Some things are worth fixing, worth preserving, even if it takes a little extra effort. He's about to respond when his phone buzzes in his pocket. Another modern concession. His grandson insisted he needed a smartphone, and though James was resistant at first, he has to admit it's useful for his work. People can reach him when they need help, and sometimes he can even look up parts diagrams for the newer models of things he's asked to fix. The text is from Doug at the Auto Parts store. Got those brake pads you ordered for the Wilson boys' Chevy. Can pick up any time. James checks his watch. It's just past 7, and he has a full day ahead of him. 3 repairs scheduled, and now Mrs. Peterson's washing machine to look at. It's more work than most retired people take on, but he wouldn't have it any other way. There's satisfaction in work well done, in being needed, in keeping the pieces of people's lives running smoothly. Katherine Walsh-Reynolds drums her manicured fingers against the Tesla's steering wheel, watching the familiar landmarks of Cedar Grove scroll past her window. The navigation system had tried to route her around this small town, suggesting faster highways and more efficient paths, but she'd deliberately overridden it. Some journeys aren't about efficiency. The leather-bound yearbook sits in the passenger seat, a time capsule she'd retrieved from her private vault just yesterday. Inside, preserved between its pages, a photograph captures a moment frozen in amber. A young James Mitchell leaning over the engine of a '67 Mustang, showing a teenage Katherine how to check the timing belt. Her dark hair is pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she's wearing his oversized shopcoat, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. They're both laughing at something now lost to time. The photo had survived 4 decades, 3 marriages, and the building of a tech empire worth billions. While other CEOs displayed their first dollar or their company's initial public offering documents, Katherine kept this photograph in a small silver frame on her private desk, away from the prying eyes of board members and journalists. Robert, her third husband, who'd passed away 6 months ago, had been the only one who knew the whole story. In their final conversation, as the machines beeped their steady countdown in the hospital room, he'd squeezed her hand and whispered, "Katie, when I'm gone, promise me you'll find him." Even then, practical to the end, he'd understood what she'd never admitted to herself, that part of her heart had never left Cedar Grove. The town has changed less than she expected. Mary's Diner still anchors the corner of Main and Oak, its neon sign casting the same warm glow she remembers from high school afternoons. The movie theater where she and James had shared their first kiss has been converted into a bookstore, but the original marquee remains. Even the old auto shop, where Henry Mitchell had taught them both about cars, still stands, though the sign now reads Peterson's Auto Parts. Her Tesla, a vehicle worth more than most houses in Cedar Grove, feels conspicuous on these modest streets. She debated taking one of her less ostentatious cars, but something about the juxtaposition feels right. She's not here to pretend she's still the same 17-year-old girl who left town with nothing but dreams and determination. She's earned every bit of her success, built her company from the ground up, and transformed the way the world thinks. About artificial intelligence and machine learning, the familiar ache returns as she passes Cedar Grove High School. The memories here are still sharp enough to draw blood. Stolen kisses between classes, James tutoring her in physics while she taught him computer programming, long discussions about their future as they worked on cars in his father's shop. They'd had it all planned out. They'd go to college together, start a business combining their talents, build a life merging the physical and digital worlds. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The acceptance letter from MIT had arrived the same day James's father had his first heart attack. She'd gotten the call just hours after the graduation ceremony, James's voice tight with pain as he explained that he had to stay, had to help his father keep the shop running. She'd offered to defer her acceptance, to stay with him, but he'd refused. "You have to go," he'd insisted. "This is your dream. I'll figure something out, and then I'll join you." But he never did. The letters grew shorter, the phone calls less frequent, and by Christmas of her freshman year, they'd stopped altogether. She'd thrown herself into her studies, then into building her company, using work to fill the James-shaped hole in her heart. 3 marriages had proven that no one else quite fit that space. Katherine pulls into the parking lot of the Cedar Grove Historical Society, housed in what used to be the town library. She needs to ground herself, to reconnect with the place she once called home before she tries to find James. The yearbook comes with her, clutched like a talisman against her chest. Inside, the air smells of old books and furniture polish. An elderly volunteer looks up from her computer, her eyes widening slightly at Katherine's designer suit and the obvious quality of her accessories. "Can I help you find anything?" the volunteer asks, clearly trying to place Katherine's face. "Yes," Katherine says, setting the yearbook on the counter. "I'm doing some research on local businesses. Specifically, I'm interested in Mitchell's Auto Repair, the original shop, owned by Henry Mitchell." The volunteer's face lights up with recognition. "Oh, Henry's place, of course. His son James still lives here, you know, still fixes things for half the town, though he's officially retired." "Are you writing a book?" Katherine manages a small smile. "Something like that. Could you tell me more about what happened to the original shop?" For the next hour, Katherine sits in a comfortable armchair while the volunteer, who introduces herself as Betty, fills in the gaps in her knowledge. Henry Mitchell had passed away in 1989, and James had sold the shop a few years later, though he'd kept doing repairs from a workshop at his house. He'd never married, Betty adds, with a hint of gossip in her tone, though half the single women in town had tried over the years. "He's got a gift with machines," Betty explains, bringing out a folder of old newspaper clippings. "People say he can fix anything. These days, with everything being so disposable, that's a rare talent." Katherine's throat tightens as she looks at a yellowed photograph of James accepting an award from the Chamber of Commerce. He looks so much like his father now, the same kind eyes, the same capable hands. She remembers those hands teaching her about engines, remembers how gentle they could be despite their strength. As she leaves the Historical Society, Katherine checks her phone. 17 missed calls from her office, 38 urgent emails, and a text from her executive assistant warning that the board is getting nervous about her unplanned absence. She silences the phone and slips it back into her purse. For once in her life, the empire she's built can wait. She needs to find James Mitchell, not for closure, not for reminiscence, but because after 45 years of running from her past, she's finally ready to face the truth. She never stopped loving him. The question is, after all this time, will he even recognize the woman she's become? The Tesla's hood is up, and Katherine finds herself studying James's hands as he works. They're older now, marked by decades of honest labor, but they move with the same precise confidence she remembers from their youth. A familiar scar, thin and white, runs across his right knuckles, and suddenly she's 17 again, watching him bandage that fresh cut after a slip of the wrench while working on old Mr. Henderson's Buick. "Your timing belt's fine," James says, his voice carrying that same gentle authority it had when he taught auto shop students. "But there's a problem with your serpentine belt. Probably why your power steering started acting up." He straightens up, wiping his hands on a shop rag, and Katherine has to resist the urge to reach out and touch his face, to trace the lines that time has etched around his eyes. "Can you fix it?" she asks, knowing the answer, but needing to hear his voice again. Her own sounds strange to her ears, carefully modulated through years of board meetings and TED Talks. James nods, reaching into his father's toolbox, the same one, she realizes with a start, that they'd used to fix her first car, a beaten-up Volkswagen Beetle that had cost her entire summer's savings. "Always keep a few universal belts in my truck. Won't take more than 30 minutes. He moves around the car with practiced ease, though she notices he favors his left knee slightly. A new development, something from the years she missed. The thought sends an unexpected pang through her chest. "You've been doing this a long time," she says, testing the waters, watching his reaction. "All my life," he responds, selecting a wrench from the toolbox. "My father taught me and his father taught him, though I doubt either of them ever worked on anything quite like this." He gestures at the Tesla's complex engine compartment. "These new electric cars, they're something else. Still, principles are principles. An engine's an engine, even if it runs on batteries instead of gas." Katherine watches as he removes the worn belt, his movements efficient and precise. The autumn breeze carries the scent of fallen leaves and motor oil, and for a moment, the years between them seem to compress. She remembers countless afternoons in his father's shop, the radio playing soft rock while they worked on cars together, dreaming about their future. "Must be quite a change," she ventures, "working on electric vehicles instead of the classics." James pauses, and she sees a flicker of something cross his face. Recognition, memory. "You know," he says slowly, "had a student once who was fascinated by the idea of electric cars. Way back before they were practical, smart girl, used to talk about combining computer systems with traditional engines, making them smarter, more efficient." He shakes his head, smiling slightly. She was ahead of her time. Katherine's heart skips a beat. He's talking about her, about their long conversations about the future of automotive technology, conversations that had helped shape her company's eventual direction, though he couldn't know that. "What happened to her?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. "Went off to MIT, he replies, his hands steady, but his voice carrying a hint of old pain. "Last I heard, she'd done well for herself, very well." He returns to his work, but Katherine catches the slight tremor in his hands, sees the way his jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. He remembers. Maybe not consciously, not yet, but somewhere beneath the surface, he remembers her. A car passes. On Route 27, its horn honking at someone, and the moment breaks. James returns to installing the new belt, his movements professional and focused. Katherine watches him work, noting how he explains each step just as he used to in their youth, making sure she understands what he's doing and why. "See this tensioner here," he says, pointing with the wrench. "It's what keeps the belt at the right tightness. Too loose and the belt slips. Too tight and you risk damaging the bearings. It's all about finding the right balance." The metaphor isn't lost on her. Their own story had lost its balance somewhere along the way, slipping off track like a worn belt. Now here they are, 45 years later, and she's watching him make precise adjustments with those familiar hands, unaware that he's working on her car, unaware that the teenager he once loved is standing right beside him. The scar on his hand catches the sunlight as he makes a final adjustment, and Katherine finds herself speaking before she can stop herself. "That scar," she says. "You got it fixing Mr. Henderson's Buick, didn't you? Spring of '78? James freezes, the wrench suspended in midair. Slowly, very slowly, he turns to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since he stopped to help. She sees the recognition dawn in his eyes, watches as 45 years of memories cascade across his face. "Katie," he whispers, using the name that only he had ever been allowed to use. "Katie Mitchell." But before she can respond, his professional instincts take over, and he quickly turns back to the engine, his hands shaking slightly as he finishes tightening the belt. "Almost done here," he says, his voice rough. "Just need to check the tension. One more time." Katherine understands. Some moments are too big, too overwhelming to face head-on. Sometimes you need the familiar comfort of work, of fixing what's broken before you can deal with what's been found. "Take your time, James," she says softly. "I've waited 45 years. I can wait a few more minutes." The silence between them pulses with unspoken words as James closes the Tesla's hood. His movements are deliberate, measured, as if he's trying to hold himself together through sheer force of habit. Katherine's hand moves unconsciously to her neck, where a spark plug pendant once hung, a gift from James on her 17th birthday, a piece of automotive poetry he'd polished and transformed into jewelry. "You still take your coffee black with 2 sugars?" The question surprises them both. Of all the things James could have asked after 45 years, this is what comes out. Katherine feels tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he says quietly, putting his tools away with the same careful precision she remembers from their youth. "My workshop's just around the corner. We could," he gestures vaguely, leaving the invitation, "hanging in the autumn air." "I'd like that," she says. They walk in silence, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. Katherine's designer boots, which had seemed so appropriate this morning, now feel out of place on the familiar gravel path. James leads her past his house to a large workshop behind it, and as he pushes open the door, the scent of motor oil and metal takes her back to 1978. "You can't seriously expect to learn about cars in those shoes," 16-year-old James had said, trying and failing to hide his amusement. Katherine had shown up for her first auto shop class in penny loafers and a pleated skirt, looking more ready for debate club than engine repair. "These are perfectly practical shoes," she'd retorted, though she'd already begun to realize her mistake. The other students, all boys, were snickering behind their hands. "Here," James had shrugged off his shop coat and held it out to her. "At least protect your clothes. Dad will kill me if I let a student ruin their outfit on my watch." The coat had smelled of oil and something distinctly James, a mix of soap and autumn air. It had swallowed her whole, the sleeves hanging well, past her fingertips, but something about wearing it had made her stand straighter, more confident. "Now," he'd said, leading her to a partially disassembled engine, "let's start with the basics. This is where the magic happens." "Katherine." James's voice pulls her back to the present. He's holding the workshop door open, waiting. Inside, the space is a curious blend of old and new. Classic tools hang on the walls, alongside diagnostic tablets and modern equipment. In one corner, a vintage radio sits atop a workbench, the same model they'd listened to during those long afternoons of learning and laughter. "You kept it," Katherine says, moving toward the radio. "Restored it last year." James runs a hand along its wooden case. "Still picks up the oldies station just fine." The memory hits her like a physical force. "This song," Katherine had squealed, turning up the volume on the shop radio. "James, you have to dance with me." "I'm covered in grease," he'd protested, holding up his stained hands. "So am I," she'd laughed, grabbing his arms and pulling him away from the Mustang they'd been working on. "Come on, future Mr. Fix-It, show me your moves." They'd swayed together in the gathering dusk of the shop, her head on his shoulder, his hands careful not to stain her clothes too badly. The Beatles sang about holding hands, and for that moment everything had seemed possible. "I almost bought one of your company's AI systems last year," James says, moving to the small coffee maker in the corner. "For diagnostics. Heard they're the best in the business." The words snap Katherine back to the present. "Did you?" Couldn't quite justify the cost for a one-man operation. He measures coffee with practiced motions. "But I read the reviews. Revolutionary technology, they said. Changed the whole industry. He pauses, his back still turned. I knew it was your company as soon as I saw the name. Walsh Dynamics. You kept your name. My first name, Katherine corrects softly. After my third divorce, I stopped collecting surnames. James nods, still focused on the coffee maker. I saw that too. In the papers. Your wedding to Robert Reynolds, the merger with his tech company, his passing 6 months ago. He turns, finally, meeting her eyes. I'm sorry, Katie, about Robert. The genuine sympathy in his voice makes her throat tight. He told me to find you, she admits. At the end, he always knew about you. James's hands tighten on the coffee mug he's holding. And is that why you're here? Because your husband's last wish was for you to track down an old flame? No, Katherine says firmly. I'm here because for 45 years I've measured every man I've met against the boy who taught me that understanding how things work is the first step to making them better. I'm here because every time my company releases a new automotive diagnostic system, I hear your voice explaining engines to me. I'm here because, her voice catches, because I never stopped wondering if I made the right choice. The coffee maker beeps, saving them both from the weight of her words. James pours 2 cups black, adds 2 sugars to each. His hands shake slightly as he holds one out to her. Their fingers brush as she takes the mug, and suddenly they're both 17 again, stealing moments between classes, dreaming of a future they thought they'd share. Katherine looks down and sees that James's hands are still stained with traces of oil from working on her car, just like they always used to be. Some things, it seems, never change. The local newspaper sits folded on James's workbench, and Katherine catches sight of her own face on the business page. The headline reads, Walsh Dynamics CEO takes unexpected leave of absence. She picks it up, studying the corporate photo of herself. Polished, professional, almost unrecognizable from the girl who once spent her afternoons covered in motor oil. Your board must be wondering where you are, James says, noticing what she's looking at. Let them wonder. Katherine sets the paper down. I've earned the right to disappear for a few days. The Katherine Walsh-Reynolds I read about doesn't seem like the type to disappear. His tone is careful, measuring each word. Corporate titan, tech visionary. The woman who revolutionized machine learning in automotive diagnostics. And what type does she seem like to you? James begins organizing his tools, a habit she remembers from their youth, his way of keeping his hands busy when conversations get difficult. Someone who knows exactly what she wants and how to get it. Someone who's left the small-town life far behind. Is that what you think I did? Just left everything behind? The hurt in her voice makes him pause. Didn't you? He turns to face her. MIT, Silicon Valley, 3 marriages, billions in corporate acquisitions. Seems like a pretty clear trajectory to me. Katherine moves closer, close enough to see the slight tremor in his hands as he grips a wrench. I have a file in my office, she says quietly. Every newspaper clipping about Mitchell's auto repair I could find. The award you won for community service in '92, the article about how you kept the snowplows running during the blizzard of '85, the feature they did when you restored the town's original fire truck for the Centennial Parade. James sets the wrench down carefully. You tracked all that? I never stopped caring, James. Never stopped wondering. Don't. His voice is rough. We both made our choices. Did we? Katherine reaches into her purse, pulls out an envelope, yellowed with age. I found this when I was cleaning out Robert's study. He'd tracked it down years ago, kept it for the right moment. She holds it out. It's postmarked December 1978 from MIT's admissions office. James stares at the envelope like it might burn him. Katie, it's a letter confirming a full scholarship. For James Mitchell, Dad's medical bills were already covered by then. The fundraiser the town held took care of that. The shop was turning a profit again. Her voice breaks slightly. You never told me you were accepted too. It wouldn't have changed anything. But his voice lacks conviction. It would have changed everything. Katherine steps closer. Why? Didn't you come? The real reason, James. After all these years, I deserve the truth. The silence stretches between them, filled with the weight of 4 decades of unspoken words. Finally, James picks up a photo from his desk. Katherine recognizes his father, standing proudly in front of the shop. "You were already gone," he says softly. "Already becoming someone new. Every phone call, every letter, I could hear it in your voice, see it in your words. You were soaring, Katie, and I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of holding you back. Of being the small-town mechanic boyfriend who couldn't keep up with your brilliant new world. Of watching you realize day by day that you'd outgrown me." He sets the photo down carefully. "So I made the choice for both of us. Stayed here. Built a life I understood. A life without me." The words hang in the air between them. "A life where I could be useful. Where I knew my place." He gestures around the workshop. "This I understand. Engines, repairs, helping people. Fix what's broken. It's simple, clean. The kind of work where you know at the end of the day whether you've done good or not." Katherine's hand finds the edge of the workbench, gripping it tight. "And you think what I built isn't simple? That running a tech empire is somehow cleaner than motor oil and engine grease?" She laughs, but there's no humor in it. "God, James, I spent 20 years debugging code because it was easier than debugging my own heart. Created artificial intelligence, sophisticated enough to diagnose any engine problem, but couldn't figure out why none of my marriages worked. Built a company worth billions because it was easier than facing the truth about what I'd lost." A car horn honks on the distant highway, making them both jump. The sound breaks the tension, and James runs a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. "We can't go back, Katie," he says gently. "We're not those kids anymore." "No," she agrees, "we're not. We're 2 people who've spent 45 years trying to fix everything except what matters most." She straightens up, squaring her shoulders. "But I didn't come here to go back, James. I came here to see if we could move forward." "Let me make us fresh coffee," James says, breaking the charged silence. These conversations go better with caffeine. Katherine watches as he moves to the small coffee station in his workshop. The mugs he pulls down catch her attention. One is chipped around the rim, ceramic worn smooth by years of use, while the other still bears a faded Cedar Grove High School logo. She recognizes it instantly. It's the mug she'd given him for Christmas in 1977. "You kept it," she says softly. James glances at the mug in his hand, then sets it down carefully. "Some things you just can't throw away." He measures the coffee with practiced movements, even when maybe you should. The coffee maker gurgles to life, filling the workshop with its familiar aroma. Through the window, Katherine can see the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. Her phone buzzes in her purse, probably another crisis at the office, but for the first time in years, she lets it ring. "Remember when we used to do this at your dad's shop?" she asks. "Coffee breaks between repairs. Dad used to say we wasted more time talking than working." James's voice carries a hint of warmth, but he never stopped buying those good beans from the specialty store in Harrison. "Because he knew you loved them." Katherine smiles at the memory. He'd pretend to grumble about the cost, but every Monday morning there'd be a fresh bag in the cabinet. James pours the coffee into both mugs, the movements automatic. 2 sugars in each, just like always. He hands her the Cedar Grove mug, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Dad liked you, you know," he says, leaning against the workbench. "Said you were the only student he'd ever met who asked the right questions. Not just how to fix something, but why it broke in the first place. He taught me that thinking that way was important." Katherine cradles the warm mug in her hands. "Actually, it became one of our company's core principles, understanding the root cause of mechanical failures, not just the symptoms. We built that into every diagnostic system we designed." "I know." James sips his coffee. "I've read your company's technical manuals, the methodology. It reminded me of him." The admission hangs in the air between them. Katherine studies James over the rim of her mug, noting how the afternoon light softens the lines in his face. He looks tired, she realizes, but it's a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from a life of meaningful work. Your father would be proud of you, she says, of everything you've built here. A small-town repair service? James shakes his head. Hardly compares to a tech empire. That's not what I mean. Katherine sets her mug down. You've kept his legacy alive, not just the mechanical skills, the way he treated people, the way he believed in fixing things instead of replacing them. In a world where everything's disposable, you've preserved something valuable. James is quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. Sometimes I wonder, he says finally, if that's just another word for being stuck in the past. Is that how you see yourself? How else should I see it? He gestures around the workshop. I'm still here, doing the same work, using some of the same tools. Meanwhile, you're out there changing the world. Katherine stands, moving to the window. Outside, her Tesla sits next to James's old pickup truck, a stark contrast that somehow feels right. Maybe we're both stuck, she says, just in different ways. I've spent 20 years pushing technology forward, trying to make machines smarter, more efficient. But in all that time, I never managed to fix what mattered most. And what's that? She turns back to face him. Us. The word falls between them like a dropped wrench, heavy and impossible to ignore. James sets his mug down carefully, the ceramic making a soft click against the workbench. Katie, he starts, but she holds up a hand. Let me finish, please. She takes a deep breath. I built a company that helps people diagnose problems in their cars. But I couldn't diagnose the problem in my own life, that I've spent 45 years trying to fill a James-shaped hole with work and achievement and marriages that were doomed from the start. You've accomplished amazing things, James says, softly. Yes, and I'm proud of that. But sitting here, drinking coffee from a mug I gave you when we were teenagers, I realize something. She meets his eyes. Success isn't always about moving forward. Sometimes it's about coming back to what matters, coming home. The old radio on James's workbench suddenly crackles to life, its timer activating as it does every afternoon. The familiar opening notes of In My Life by the Beatles fill the workshop, and Katherine's breath catches in her throat. Their song, the one they danced to after senior prom, the one that had played during their last goodbye at the bus station. James moves quickly to turn it off, but Katherine stops him with a gentle hand on his arm. Leave it, she says softly. Please. He stills under her touch, and for a moment they both listen to the music, letting the memories wash over them. The familiar lyrics about places and lovers long past feel almost too pointed, too perfect for this moment. I should check the final diagnostics on your car, James says, his voice rough. He steps away from her touch, moving toward the Tesla, with perhaps more haste than necessary. James, Katherine's voice stops him. The car can wait. He turns back, slowly, and she sees the struggle in his face, the professional mask he's worn all afternoon, threatening to crack. What do you want from me, Katie? The question comes out barely above a whisper. The truth. She moves closer, careful to give him space, but refusing to let him retreat completely. No more hiding behind repairs and diagnostics. No more pretending we're just a mechanic and a customer. The truth? His laugh is hollow. The truth is, I'm a 73-year-old small-town mechanic who still keeps a coffee mug from high school because I can't let go of the past. The truth is, every time I see your name in the papers, every time I use one of your company's diagnostic tools, I wonder what if. The truth is, he breaks off, running a hand over his face. Tell me, Katherine urges gently. The song on the radio shifts to another oldies tune, the soft melody underscoring the tension in the room. James moves to his workbench, picking up a framed photograph Katherine hadn't noticed before. In it, a much younger version of himself stands next to his father in front of the old shop. The truth is, he continues finally, I've spent 45 years convincing myself I made the right choice, that staying here, carrying on Dad's legacy, was what I was meant to do. He sets the photo down carefully. And most days, I believe it. I've helped people, made a difference in my own small way, but then you show up in that Tesla, successful and beautiful, and still so much the Katie I remember, and all those carefully constructed justifications start to crumble. They don't have to be justifications, Katherine says. What you've built here, what you've done for this community, it matters, James. It's real. But is it enough? He turns to face her fully. You're here talking about coming home, about fixing what's broken between us, but look at our lives, Katie. Look at how far apart they are. Are they? She gestures to her car outside. Your expertise and my technology are already working together. Maybe that's not an accident. Maybe it's showing us what's possible. James shakes his head, but she can see his resolve wavering. You have a board of directors, shareholders, responsibilities. And you have a community that needs you, skills that can't be replaced by any computer. Katherine steps closer. I'm not asking you to give up who you are, James. I'm asking if there's room in your life for who we could be. The music from the radio fades into silence, leaving them in a moment of perfect quiet. Through the workshop window, the late afternoon sun catches on the Tesla's chrome trim, sending patterns of light dancing across the walls. The contrast between old and new, past and present, seems suddenly less like a divide and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. I'm scared, Katie, James admits finally, his voice barely audible. Scared that if we try this, if we open up these old wounds, we'll find out they never really healed, that we're just chasing echoes of who we used to be. Katherine reaches out slowly and takes his hand, the one with the scar from all those years ago. His skin is rougher now, marked by decades of honest work, but the touch still sends the same electric current through her that it did when they were teenagers. Maybe we're not chasing echoes, she says softly. Maybe we're finally listening to what they've been trying to tell us all along. The moment stretches between them, their joined hands a bridge across 45 years of separation. Then James's eyes catch on something glinting at Katherine's throat, partially hidden by her silk blouse collar. His breath hitches as he recognizes it, a small polished cylinder hanging from a delicate silver chain. Is that? His free hand moves unconsciously toward it. Katherine reaches up with her other hand and pulls the necklace free. The spark plug, his spark plug, the one he'd carefully polished and transformed into a pendant for her 17th birthday, catches the workshop's light. I've never taken it off, she says quietly. Not through 3 marriages, not through divorces, not through building a company or losing Robert. Every board meeting, every press conference, every technical presentation, it's been my secret. Reminder of where I came from, of who taught me to see the beauty in mechanical things. James reaches out with trembling fingers and touches the pendant gently. I made this from the spark plug of your old Volkswagen, the one that finally gave out after that road trip to Lake Michigan. You said it was fitting. Katherine's voice wavers with the memory that the part that created the spark that powered the engine should become something lasting. I remember. His voice is rough. You wore it to graduation, and now I'm wearing it back to you. Katherine unclasps the necklace and holds it out to him. Look at the inscription. James takes it carefully, turning the polished metal until he can see the tiny words he'd painstakingly engraved all those years ago. Some sparks never die. J.M. Something breaks in his carefully maintained composure. Katie. He looks up at her, and she sees the tears he's fighting to hold back. All these years. She reaches into her purse and pulls out her wallet, opening it to reveal a worn photograph tucked behind her business cards. It shows a young James leaning over an engine, explaining something with passionate intensity to an enraptured teenage Katherine. Mary took this, she says softly. That day you were teaching me about timing belts. I had it digitally restored last year when the original started to fade. There's a copy on my desk at the office, another in my home study, and this one that I carry with me everywhere. James sinks onto his work stool, still holding the necklace. I don't understand. You had everything. Success, wealth, position. Why hold on to these pieces of the past? Because they weren't pieces of the past, James. They were pieces of my heart that I left here in Cedar Grove. Katherine moves to stand in front of him. Every time I developed a new diagnostic system, I'd ask myself, what would James think? How would he approach this problem? When we created our AI learning protocols, I based them on the way you taught me. Patient, thorough, always connecting. The mechanical principles to real-world applications. She takes a deep breath. The truth is, Walsh Dynamics isn't just my company. It's our dream, the one we talked about in your father's shop, made real in a way we never imagined back then. Every innovation, every breakthrough has carried the echo of those lessons you taught me. I didn't just build a tech empire, James. I built a legacy for both of us, even if you didn't know it. James stares at the necklace in his hand, then at the woman before him. A woman who somehow manages to be both the teenage girl he loved and someone entirely new. His fingers trace the inscription again, feeling the grooves he'd carved with such care and hope. When you left, he says slowly, I convinced myself that letting you go was the right thing, that holding on to you would have been selfish. But I never, his voice breaks slightly, I never imagined you were holding on to me too. Katherine kneels in front of him, taking both his hands in hers. James Mitchell, I need you to understand something. I didn't come back to Cedar Grove looking for closure or to reminisce about what might have been. I came because every achievement, every success has felt incomplete without you there to share it. Because Robert's last gift to me was helping me see what I've known all along, that some sparks really never die. James looks at their joined hands, her manicured fingers intertwined with his work-roughened ones. What are you saying, Katie? I'm saying that Walsh Dynamics needs a new head of mechanical engineering and diagnostics, someone who understands machines in a way no computer ever could. Someone who can help us remember that behind every technical problem is a human need, waiting to be met. She squeezes his hands. I'm saying that maybe it's time for both of us to stop fixing everything except what matters most. The spark plug pendant catches the light between them, its polished surface reflecting the tears that finally escape. Down James's cheeks. You can't be serious. I'm just a small-town mechanic. No. Katherine cuts him off gently. You're the man who taught me that understanding how things work is the first step to making them better. And right now, what I understand is that I'm tired of my life working perfectly on paper, but feeling broken where it matters most. James stands abruptly, the spark plug necklace still clutched in his hand, and walks to a cabinet in the corner of his workshop. His hands shake slightly as he enters a combination into an old safe. The same numbers, Katherine notices with a start, as her old locker combination from high school. There's something you need to see, he says, his voice unsteady. Something I should have shown you 45 years ago. He withdraws a bundle of letters, held together with a faded blue ribbon. Katherine recognizes her own handwriting on the envelopes, but mixed among them are others she's never seen before. Letters in James's handwriting, addressed to her at MIT, all stamped but never sent. I wrote to you every week that first semester, James says, holding the bundle like it might crumble to dust, but I never mailed them. And then, when your letters started coming less frequently, when I could read between the lines how exciting your new life was. He trails off, running a thumb over the edges of the envelopes. Katherine reaches for the bundle with trembling hands. May I? He nods, and she carefully unties the ribbon. The first unmailed letter is dated September 15th, 1978, just 2 weeks after she'd left for MIT. The paper is thin with age, the creases worn soft from being folded and unfolded countless times. My dearest Katie, she reads aloud, her voice catching. Dad's doing better. The shop is slowly getting back on its feet. And I got the most amazing news. MIT accepted me for spring admission, full scholarship just like you. I'm going to surprise you at Christmas. Just imagine it. You and me, together in Cambridge, building our dream just like we planned. She looks up at him, tears blurring her vision. But you never came. James sinks back onto his stool. 2 days after I wrote that letter, Thompson's Automotive opened across town. State-of-the-art equipment, factory-trained technicians, prices we couldn't match. Dad, he tried to hide it, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The shop had been in our family for 3 generations. The thought of losing it, especially after his heart attack. He shakes his head. I couldn't leave, not then. So you made the choice for both of us, Katherine says softly, without telling me about the acceptance, without explaining about Thompson's. I thought I was being noble. His laugh is bitter. Falling on my sword so you could fly free. But really I was just scared. Scared of failing in Cambridge. Scared of watching you outgrow me. Scared of not being enough. Katherine opens another letter, this one dated November 1978. Katie, your last letter was full of computer science terms I barely understand. You're already speaking a new language, living in a world so different from Cedar Grove. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe letting you go is the kindest thing I can do. I was wrong, James says quietly. So wrong. But by the time I realized it, you seemed to be thriving. Your letters talked about computer labs and study groups and ambitious plans. I told myself you were better off without some small-town mechanic holding you back. Katherine sets the letters down carefully and pulls another item from her purse. A creased photograph showing a young James in overalls, grinning proudly next to a freshly repaired Mustang. This was in my college dorm room, then my first apartment, then my first office. For 45 years it's been the first thing I unpack whenever I move. She moves to stand in front of him. I wasn't thriving, James. I was surviving. Yes, I threw myself into computers and coding. Yes, I made friends and built a career, but every success felt hollow because I couldn't share it with you. Do you know why I focused on automotive diagnostics when I could have gone into any tech field? James shakes his head. Because it was the closest I could get to that feeling I had in your father's shop. The joy of understanding how things work, of fixing what's broken. Every line of code I wrote was a love letter to those afternoons we spent together. Every diagnostic system, an attempt to capture the way you taught me to listen to engines. Katie, James's voice breaks on her name. Let me finish. She picks up one of his unmailed letters. You were afraid of not being enough? I built a billion-dollar company trying to prove I could be worthy of the future we'd planned. Every acquisition, every innovation, I kept thinking maybe this would be enough to show you that our dream had been right all along. James stands, closing the distance between them. You never had to prove anything. You were always enough, Katie. I was the one who wasn't brave enough to fight for us. Then fight for us now, she whispers. These letters, all these words we never sent, they're proof that we never really let go. That somewhere underneath all our success and separation, we're still those teenagers who believed we could build something extraordinary together. She reaches up and takes the spark plug necklace from his hand, holding it between them. You taught me that every engine needs a spark to run. Well, we're still here, James. The spark never died. The question is, are we finally ready to see where it can take us? The moment shatters with the sharp trill of Katherine's phone. She instinctively reaches for it, then hesitates, her hand hovering over her purse. You should answer it, James says gently. Your world isn't going to stop turning just because we're figuring things out. Katherine pulls out the phone, grimacing at the screen. It's my CFO. And, oh, she scrolls through the notifications. Apparently, my unplanned disappearance has sparked takeover rumors. Our stock is down 12%. The reality of their different worlds fills the workshop like a tangible presence. James moves to his workbench, picking up the newspaper with Katherine's photo. Walsh Dynamics CEO takes unexpected leave of absence, he reads aloud. Sources suggest potential health concerns or corporate restructuring. Marcus must be having a meltdown, Katherine mutters, quickly typing out a message. He hates when I go off-grid. She looks up at James. The board's calling an emergency meeting. They want me back in San Francisco tomorrow morning. Of course they do. James's voice is carefully neutral. You should go. Billions of dollars and thousands of jobs depend on you. Come with me, Katherine says suddenly. Come to San Francisco, see what we've built, what your influence helped create. Meet the team, see our labs. Katie, James holds up the newspaper. Look at this, really look. Your world. It's all here in black and white. Board meetings, stock prices, corporate takeovers. What place does a small-town mechanic have in that world? The same place he's always had, she insists. James, our newest diagnostic system is revolutionary, precisely because it combines AI with practical mechanical knowledge. But we're missing something, the human element, the intuitive understanding that comes from years of hands-on experience. That's what you could bring. Her phone chirps again, more urgently. James watches as she reads the messages, noting how her posture subtly shifts, becoming more CEO than Katie. The change makes his heart ache. The press is starting to dig, she says, her voice tighter. Someone at the Historical Society must have talked. They know I'm in Cedar Grove. She looks up at him, worry creasing her brow. It won't take them long to make the connection, to find out about our history. As if on cue, a car slows down outside the workshop. They both turn to see a sedan with a local newspaper logo crawling past, the driver clearly trying to peer in through the windows. And so it begins, James says quietly. Your private life about to become public property. Tech billionaire's secret small-town romance. They'll dig up every detail, turn our story into clickbait. I don't care about that, Katherine starts. But James cuts her off. But I do. He gestures around his workshop. This life I've built, the trust this community has in me, it's based on being reliable, consistent, not the kind of person who shows up in gossip columns or business news. Another car passes by, this one moving even more slowly. Through the window, they can see someone holding up a phone, clearly taking pictures. I should go, Katherine says, though it costs her to say the words. Before this gets out of hand, give you some space to think. Running away again? The words slip out before James can stop them. Katherine stiffens. That's not fair. No, it's not, he agrees, deflating. Slightly. I'm sorry, it's just seeing your world starting to intrude here in my space. He runs a hand through his hair. Maybe I'm not as ready for this as I thought. Her phone buzzes again, and this time the ringtone indicates a video call. The name Marcus Chen, CFO, flashes on the screen. Take it, James says. You need to deal with this. It's your responsibility. Katherine looks at him for a long moment, then answers the call. Marcus, give me 1 minute. She mutes the video and turns back to James. This isn't over. Whatever complications we face, whatever adjustments we need to make, I'm not walking away, not again. Even if it costs you 12% of your stock value. His attempt at humor falls flat. Even if it costs me the whole damn company. She reaches out and squeezes his hand. I spent 45 years building something extraordinary. But I never forgot that it started here, in a workshop very much like this one, with a boy who taught me that the most important things in life can't be measured in stock prices. Her phone buzzes insistently. The world beyond the workshop demands her attention, refuses to be ignored. Go, James says softly. Deal with what you need to deal with. I'll be here. I've got some thinking to do anyway. Katherine hesitates, then quickly presses a kiss to his cheek. This isn't goodbye, James Mitchell. This is just intermission. She turns away, unmuting her phone as she walks toward her Tesla. Yes, Marcus, I'm here. No, I'm not having a breakdown. Listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. James watches through the workshop window as she slides into her car, immediately transforming into the powerful CEO she needs to be. The contrast between her designer clothes and his oil-stained workspace has never been more apparent. Yet his hand drifts to his cheek, where the warmth of her kiss lingers. On his workbench, the spark plug necklace catches the late afternoon sun, sending tiny reflections dancing across the walls. Some sparks never die, but can they survive in the harsh light of reality? James watches Katherine's Tesla disappear down Route 27, its sleek silhouette a stark contrast against the familiar landscape of Cedar Grove. Through his workshop window, he can see more cars beginning to gather, journalists probably, drawn by the scent of a story. The quiet sanctuary of his workspace threatens to become the center of unwanted attention. His phone rings, startling him. It's Mary from the diner. "James Mitchell," she says without preamble. "Please tell me that's not Katherine Walsh's car I just saw heading toward the highway." "The Katherine Walsh who's been all over the business news lately?" He sinks onto his work stool. "It's a long story, Mary. It's Katie, isn't it? Our Katie." Mary's voice softens. "The one whose picture you still keep in that toolbox of yours." James glances at his father's toolbox, knowing exactly which photograph she means. Katherine in her graduation cap and gown, smiling at the camera with all the promise of youth. He'd tucked it away decades ago, but never could bring himself to remove it. "Word's spreading fast," Mary continues. "Sarah Chen from the pharmacy says there are reporters asking questions in town. They want to know about your history, about why the CEO of Walsh Dynamics is here." A heavy manila envelope catches his eye. The contract Katherine had left behind. Head of Mechanical Engineering and Diagnostics at Walsh Dynamics. The salary figure alone has more zeros than he's ever seen. But it's not the money that makes his hands tremble as he opens it. Inside, beneath the formal offer letter, he finds something else. Detailed plans for a new research and development center. The proposed location, Cedar Grove, on the old Thompson's automotive lot that had once threatened his father's business. "James, are you still there?" Mary's voice brings him back to the present. "Yeah, I'm here." He stares at the plans. "Mary, what would you say if things in Cedar Grove were about to change? Big changes." "Honey, things are already changing. The question is whether you're going to be part of that change or hide from it." Meanwhile, 30 miles down the highway, Katherine sits in a virtual board meeting from her parked Tesla, her tablet propped on the steering wheel. The faces of her board members stare back at her from the screen, their expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed frustration. "Let me be clear," she says, cutting through their objections. "The Cedar Grove R&D Center isn't just a sentimental project, it's the future of Walsh Dynamics. We've become too removed from the practical aspects of our industry. This facility will bridge the gap between our AI innovations and real-world mechanical expertise. And this mechanic," one board member says delicately, "he's qualified to head such an ambitious project." Katherine pulls up a file on her tablet. "James Mitchell has solved mechanical problems our best diagnostic systems couldn't crack. His understanding of automotive systems isn't just practical, it's intuitive, the kind of knowledge that comes from decades of hands-on experience. That's exactly what our AI needs to learn from." Her CFO, Marcus, clears his throat. "Katherine, the press is already speculating about your connection to Cedar Grove. If they discover your personal history with Mitchell, then they discover it." Katherine's voice is steel. "I've spent 20 years making this company an industry leader. I've earned the right to make bold moves. And this," she looks at the plans for the R&D center, "this isn't just bold, it's necessary." Back in his workshop, James reads through the contract again. The position would allow him to keep his repair business, to stay rooted in Cedar Grove while helping shape the future of automotive technology. It's everything they dreamed of as teenagers translated into modern terms. His phone buzzes with a text from Katherine. "The board's on board, pending your acceptance. But this has to be your choice, James. No pressure, no obligations. Just think about it." He looks around his workshop, at the tools that have defined his life, at the photographs that tell his story, at the spark plug necklace still lying on his workbench. Then his eyes fall on the newspaper headlines about Katherine's unexplained absence, about the corporate wolves circling Walsh Dynamics. Mary's words echo in his mind. Things are already changing. The question is whether you're going to be part of that change or hide from it. His fingers hover over his phone, ready to text Katherine back. when he sees movement outside. More reporters are gathering, their cameras trained on his workshop. The simple life he's built for himself stands on the brink of transformation. The question is he ready to step into Katherine's world, even if she's offering to meet him halfway? The contract sits open on his workbench, waiting for his signature. Beside it, his father's old toolbox holds decades of memory and tradition. Two worlds, once torn apart, now offering a chance to merge, but at what cost? And is he brave enough this time to find out? Mary's Diner has always been Cedar Grove's central nervous system, where news travels faster than coffee can be poured. By sunset, the small restaurant is packed with townspeople, all discussing the day's revelations. The usual evening crowd has been joined by a handful of out-of-town reporters, their press badges and expensive cameras marking them as outsiders. But Mary stands guard at her counter like a sentinel, wielding her coffee pot like a weapon. When one reporter tries to pump her for information about James and Katherine's high school romance, she fixes him with a stern look that could curdle milk. "Sugar's on the table, honey," she says pointedly, "but gossip isn't on the menu." The bell above the door chimes, and James steps in, looking worn but determined. The diner falls silent for a moment before erupting in warm greetings. Tom Harris, the high school principal, immediately vacates his usual spot at the counter. "Saved your seat, James," he says, clapping him on the shoulder. "Figure you could use a cup of Mary's coffee about now." Mary's already reaching for his mug, the same one he's used for decades, when she notices he's carrying his father's old toolbox. It's not his usual evening routine, and the significance isn't lost on her. "Made a decision, have you?" she asks, quietly, setting his coffee in front of him. Before James can answer, Sarah Chen from the pharmacy hurries in, looking flustered. "There are 3 news vans parked outside my store," she announces to the room at large. "They're asking everyone about James and Katherine Walsh-Reynolds." "Someone needs to do something." Bill Thompson, the retired postal worker, stands up from his booth. "Already on it. Called my boy Tommy. He's set up a volunteers patrol. No reporters getting past Cedar Grove's town limits without our say-so." James stares into his coffee, overwhelmed by the protectiveness of his community. "You don't have to do all this." "Like hell we don't," Mary says, topping off his cup. "We protect our own in Cedar Grove. Always have, always will." The diner's door chimes again, and Doug from the auto parts store rushes in. "James, you're not going to believe this. I just got a call from that fancy car magazine. You know, the one that always has the $1 million vehicles on the cover. They're offering serious money for pictures of you and Katherine from high school." "Vultures," Mary mutters, but Doug's grinning. "I told them I had something better. Told them about how James kept Thompson's automotive from going under during the recession, how he's fixed every snowplow in the county during blizzards, how he rebuilt Mrs. Peterson's washing machine for free when her Social Security was late." "Doug," James warns, but the parts store owner continues. "Told them if they want a story about James Mitchell, it shouldn't be about some old romance. It should be about how he's kept this town running for 45 years, about how he's the kind of mechanic who still makes house calls to check on elderly customers' cars before winter hits." The bell chimes once more, and Mrs. Peterson herself hobbles in, looking more spry than usual. "Is it true?" she asks James. "Are you going to work with Katie's company? Because I just told those reporters outside that you're the best mechanical. Mind in 3 states, and if Katie Walsh had any sense, she'd have hired you years ago." James feels his throat tighten. On the diner's ancient television, set perpetually to the local news, a reporter stands outside his workshop. But instead of the expected gossip about a billionaire's lost love, she's interviewing Cedar Grove residents about the proposed R&D center. "This could transform the region," the mayor is saying on screen, "bringing high-tech jobs while preserving our community's values. And there's no one better to bridge that gap than James Mitchell." Mary sets a fresh cup of coffee in front of James, then pulls something from beneath the counter, a faded, reserved sign that hasn't seen use in years. "For tomorrow morning," she says, "in case you and Katie want to have breakfast without." An audience. Some conversations deserve privacy. James opens his father's toolbox and carefully places Katherine's contract inside, next to the old photograph he's kept all these years. The toolbox that had once represented his ties to the past now holds the key to his future. "You know," Tom Harris says thoughtfully, "I remember teaching Katie in AP Physics. She was brilliant, but what made her special was how she could explain complex ideas in simple terms. Sounds like that's exactly what she's still doing with her company, making complicated technology accessible to regular folks. Just like someone else we know," Mary adds, looking meaningfully at James. "Maybe some things are meant to come full circle." Outside the diner's windows, camera flashes occasionally light up the gathering dusk. But inside, surrounded by the people who've defined his life's work, James finally sees the truth. He doesn't have to choose between his world and Katherine's. Cedar Grove isn't just his anchor, it's the foundation for something new, something that honors the past while embracing the future. He reaches for his phone and types a simple message to Katherine. "Mary's, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Some decisions are better made over coffee." The next morning dawns clear and crisp, autumn leaves skittering across Mary's diner's parking lot. Katherine arrives early, her Tesla now sporting a thin layer of Cedar Grove dust that somehow makes it look more at home. She's dressed more casually. Today, a simple sweater and slacks rather than yesterday's power suit, though the quality of the clothing still marks her as someone from another world. The reserved sign sits on the counter like a promise, and Mary wordlessly guides Katherine to James's usual spot. The coffee is already poured, 2 sugars waiting beside the cup. "He'll be here," Mary says, noting Katherine's nervous glance. "At the door. That man hasn't missed a 7 a.m. coffee in 30 years. Besides," she adds with a knowing smile, "his truck's been parked behind my diner since dawn. He's probably watching to make sure the coast is clear." As if on cue, James appears through the back entrance carrying a large rolled-up document and his father's toolbox. He's wearing a clean work shirt with Mitchell's Repairs embroidered over the pocket, and Katherine notices he's taken extra care with his appearance while still remaining true to who he is. "Brought something to show you," he says by way of greeting, carefully unrolling what appears to be an old blueprint on the counter. "Found this in Dad's things last night." Katherine leans forward, recognizing the neat mechanical drawings. "Is this our original plan? The one we sketched out senior year for Mitchell and Walsh Automotive Solutions?" He smooths the paper carefully. "Dad had it professionally drafted, said every good business needed proper blueprints." Mary appears with fresh coffee, takes one, look at their intense expressions, and quietly flips the diner's sign to closed, despite the early hour. Through the windows, they can see reporters gathering, but the blinds are drawn, creating a private bubble in the morning quiet. "I spent all night comparing this to your R&D center proposal," James continues, pulling the modern documents from his toolbox. "The scale is different, the technology unimaginable when we drew this up, but the core idea." He overlays the old blueprint with the new plans. "It's the same dream, Katie, just evolved." Katherine traces the old drawing with gentle fingers. "You kept this all these years?" "Dad did. Said someday I'd need to remember what it was like to dream big." He takes a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your offer." And James pulls out a third document, the contract she'd left with him. He's marked several sections with post-it notes in his neat handwriting. "I have some conditions." Katherine straightens, CEO instincts kicking in, but forces herself to relax. This isn't a corporate negotiation. This is James, who taught her that every good repair starts with clear understanding. "I'm listening," she says. "First, I keep my repair business, not just as a hobby, as a functioning part of the R&D center. Real cars, real problems, real solutions. That's how we stay grounded, how we make sure your AI learns from actual experience." Katherine nods. "Already built into the plan. We'll need a steady stream of real-world cases." "Second," he taps the blueprint, "we build it here, but we do it right. Local contractors where possible. Fair wages, Job training for Cedar Grove residents who want to be part of it. This town gave me everything. I want to make sure it benefits from this change. Done. Katherine pulls out her tablet, makes a quick note. Anything else? James's expression softens. Yeah, one more thing. He reaches into the toolbox and pulls out the spark plug necklace. If we're really doing this, merging our worlds, building something new, I want to do it right this time. No more running away, no more making decisions for each other. We face whatever comes together. He holds out the necklace, and Katherine bows her head slightly, letting him fasten it around her neck. The familiar weight settles against her collarbone like coming home. Partners? She asks softly. Partners, he agrees, then adds with a slight smile. In everything. Through the diner's windows, they can see more reporters arriving, cameras ready. The outside world is waiting to turn their story into headlines. But here, in the quiet morning light, surrounded by blueprints both old and new, they're just James and Katie again, planning a future that honors both their dreams. Mary appears with fresh coffee and a plate of buttermilk biscuits. For strength, she says with a wink. Something tells me you two have a busy day ahead, building bridges between worlds. Katherine's tablet lights up with an urgent message from her office. She glances at it, then places it face down on the counter. The press release is ready, she says. One word from me, and Walsh Dynamics officially announces the Cedar Grove R&D Center, with you as head of mechanical engineering and diagnostics. James stares at his coffee cup, where the last swirl of dark liquid reflects the diner's overhead lights. Once it's official, there's no going back, no more quiet mornings. At Mary's, no more simple life of local repairs. Having second thoughts? Katherine asks softly. Not about us, he says quickly. About, he gestures vaguely at the windows, where photographers' flashes occasionally illuminate the blinds. All of this. I fix things, Katie. Cars, appliances, people's problems. It's straightforward, but this, being in the public eye, having my life dissected in business journals. Mary appears silently, sliding a sealed envelope onto the counter between them. Found this in my old files last night. Thought you might need it today. The envelope is yellowed with age, and across the front is written, James and Katie, class of '78, in faded ink. Inside, they find a photograph neither has seen before. The two of them at James's father's shop, bent over an engine together, completely absorbed in their work. But it's the expression on young James's face that catches Katherine's breath. The pure joy of teaching, of sharing his passion with someone who truly wants to understand. That's who you'll be at the R&D Center, Katherine says quietly. Not some corporate figurehead, not a face in the business pages. You'll be exactly who you've always been, the man who understands machines and knows how to help others understand them too. James traces the edge of the photograph. And what about you? Your board, your shareholders, they're already nervous about this project, about us. The stock dropped just because you came to Cedar Grove. Katherine reaches for her tablet, turns it on, and pulls up her email. Want to see something? She opens a draft of her resignation letter as CEO of Walsh Dynamics. James's eyes widen. Katie, no, you can't. I'm not resigning completely, she interrupts. Just stepping back to Chief Technology Officer. Marcus can handle the corporate side. He's been practically doing it anyway. This way, I can focus on what really matters, working with you to develop the next generation of diagnostic systems, building something that matters. But the company will be fine, she smiles. Sometimes you have to let go of control to gain something better. Someone taught me that once, in a workshop very much like the one we're going to build. The morning light is growing stronger, seeping through the diner's blinds. Soon they'll have to face the world outside, deal with the press, begin the complicated process of merging their lives and their dreams. But for now, in this quiet moment, they study the old photograph together. I have something for you too, James says finally. He reaches into his toolbox one last time and pulls out a small, wrapped package. Been working on it at night, this. In past month, didn't know why at the time, but now Katherine unwraps it carefully. Inside is a spark plug pendant, similar to the one she's wearing but newly crafted. The metal is polished to a mirror shine, and engraved along its surface are the GPS coordinates of Cedar Grove. For your office in San Francisco, he explains. So you'll always know your way home. Katherine's fingers close around the pendant as she blinks back tears. Does this mean... James picks up her tablet and hands it to her. Send the press. Release. It's time to build something extraordinary together. She takes a deep breath and presses send. Somewhere in San Francisco, the announcement goes live. Walsh Dynamics announces revolutionary R&D center in Cedar Grove, merging AI innovation with traditional automotive expertise. Through the diner's windows, they can hear the sudden commotion as reporters' phones start buzzing with the news. The quiet bubble of their morning is about to burst. Ready? Katherine asks, standing and gathering the blueprints. James picks up his toolbox, the old and the new together, and takes her hand. With you? Always. Mary holds the diner's back door open for them. Go on, she says with a knowing smile. Some beginnings are better made away from prying eyes. Besides, she adds, you've got a workshop to build. The old Thompson's automotive lot transforms with surprising speed. Where chain-link fence once rusted, sleek glass walls now rise toward the autumn sky. But unlike typical corporate construction, this project has James's fingerprints all over. It quite literally, as he insists on inspecting every detail himself. Katherine finds him early one morning, kneeling in what will become the main workshop, running his hands over the newly installed hydraulic lift. She's dressed for a video, a conference with the board, but her heels are already traded for work boots she keeps in her car. Testing the equipment? She asks, handing him a cup of coffee from Mary's. Making sure they did it right. He stands, brushing off his knees. This isn't just for show, Katie. If we're going to teach AI about real-world repairs, we need real-world tools that work. She smiles, recognizing the same attention to detail that had drawn her to him in high school. The programming team sent over the first prototype of your diagnostic interface. Want to see? James follows her to a temporary office set up in what used to be his workshop. His old tool chest sits comfortably next to state-of-the-art computers, a physical representation of their merging worlds. Katherine pulls up a holographic display, technology that would have seemed like science fiction when they were teenagers. We based it on how you approach repairs, she explains, manipulating the 3D image of an engine. See how it breaks down problems step by step, just like you taught me. But it also learns from experience, adapting its approach based on real-world results. James reaches out to touch the hologram, his expression wondering. It's like looking inside my own thought process. That's the idea. We're not trying to replace human expertise. We're trying to amplify it, make it accessible to more people. She pulls up another screen. And look at this. Every solution it suggests comes with practical implications. Cost, time, long-term, reliability, all the things you consider when helping people make decisions about their repairs. A knock at the door interrupts them. It's Sarah Chen from the pharmacy, leading a group of local high school students. Sorry to interrupt, she says, not looking sorry at all, but these kids are here for the apprenticeship program tour. The students file in, trying to look professional, but unable to hide their awe at the technology. James straightens up. Automatically, reaching for the teaching voice Katherine remembers from their youth. Welcome to Mitchell Walsh Advanced Automotive, he says, using the name they'd chosen together, a blend of past and present. Who here knows how to change a tire? A few. Hands go up hesitantly. Good, because before you touch any of this fancy equipment, he gestures at the holographic display, you're going to learn the basics. Can't teach a computer what you don't understand yourself. Katherine watches from the corner as James leads the students through a basic diagnostic sequence, explaining how traditional mechanical knowledge feeds into the AI systems. He's in his element, bridging the gap between old and new, just as they dreamed of doing 45 years ago. Her tablet buzzes with messages from San Francisco, stock reports, project updates, meeting requests. But they feel less urgent. Now, the real work is happening here, in this room where James Mitchell is teaching a new generation how to combine human intuition with artificial intelligence. Later, as the sun sets through the workshop's windows, they sit together on a workbench, sharing the last of Mary's coffee. The building around them is still under construction, but they can see their vision taking shape. "Got the final property paperwork today," Katherine says, pulling out a deed. "The house next door to yours. Previous owners were happy to sell once they heard about the project." James takes the document, noting both their names on the title. "You sure about this? Living in Cedar Grove part-time, splitting your life between here and San Francisco?" "I'm sure about us," she says simply. "The rest is just logistics." She leans her head on his shoulder, breathes in the familiar scent of coffee and motor oil that still clings to his clothes. "Besides, someone once told me that understanding how things work is the first step to making them better." Through the workshop door, they can see the lights of Cedar Grove twinkling on. The town is changing, growing, but somehow staying true to itself, just like them. The next morning will bring more challenges. Construction decisions, programming problems, the constant balance of tradition and innovation. But for now, they sit together in the growing dark, two people who found their way back to their shared dream, making it better than they'd ever imagined. 6 months later, a familiar scene unfolds on Route 27. A car sits on the shoulder, hood up, while two figures bend over the engine. But this time, it's not a chance encounter. It's a carefully planned moment. "Ready?" James asks, adjusting. The diagnostic tablet connected to the vintage Volkswagen Beetle's engine. Katherine stands beside him, wearing his old shop coat over her business attire, the sleeves rolled up just like they used to be. "Recording," she confirms, as cameras from the tech press capture what will become Walsh Dynamics' new promotional campaign. The Beetle, an exact match for Katherine's first car, represents where their story began. The advanced diagnostic equipment showing holographic projections above the engine represents where it's going. "So what's the first step in diagnosing an engine problem?" James asks, his teaching voice warm and confident. "You listen," Katherine answers, the words coming as naturally as they did 45 years ago. "Every engine tells a story if you know how to hear it." The cameras roll as they demonstrate how Mitchell Walsh Advanced Automotive's newest AI system combines James's lifetime of mechanical expertise with Katherine's technological innovations. But the real story isn't in the sophisticated hardware or revolutionary software. It's in the way their hands still move in perfect sync over the engine, the way they anticipate each other's needs without speaking. "Cut!" the director calls. "That's perfect. Absolutely perfect." As the film crew packs up, Mary appears with a thermos of coffee and her knowing smile. "Thought you might need this, just like old times." They sit on the Beetle's front bumper, sharing coffee as the sunset paints Cedar Grove in shades of gold. The new R&D center gleams in the distance, its modern lines softened by the traditional brick facing James had insisted on. Through its windows, they can see students and engineers working together, combining centuries of mechanical wisdom with cutting-edge technology. "Hard to believe it's only been 6 months, Katherine says, leaning against James's shoulder. "Hard to believe it took us 45 years, he counters, then pulls something from his pocket, a small velvet box. "Which is why I don't want to waste any more time." Katherine's breath catches as he opens it, revealing not a ring, but a key fashioned from an old spark plug, similar to the one she still wears around her neck. "The house next door is finished," he says softly, "and I was thinking, maybe it's time we stopped calling it the house next door and started calling it home." He takes a deep breath. "Marry me, Katie? Not because of the company or the center or anything else. Just because I love you, and I'm tired of living next door to my future." Katherine takes the key, feeling its weight. The weight of their past, their present, their future, all forged into one piece. You know the press will have a field day with this. Tech billionaire marries small-town mechanic. Let them, James says. We've never been what they think we are anyway. We're just two people who needed 45 years to learn that some things can't be fixed separately. Yes, Katherine says simply and kisses him. Later that evening, they sit in their almost finished home, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked. Through the window, they can see both their legacies. The R&D center where innovation meets tradition, and James's workshop where he still fixes the town's appliances and cars. Two worlds no longer separate, but beautifully intertwined. The set old radio from James's workshop, now sitting in their new living room, plays softly in the background. When In My Life comes on, they dance slowly in the half-unpacked space, no longer worried about grease stains or corporate responsibilities. Some sparks never die, James murmurs against her hair, echoing the words he'd engraved so long ago. No, Katherine agrees, holding him closer. They just wait for the right moment to ignite something extraordinary. Outside, Cedar Grove settles into evening. Its streets now hosting both local repair shops and tech startups. Its diner serving both farmers and software engineers. Change has come to the small town, but like James and Katherine, it's found a way to grow while keeping its heart intact. On Route 27, the restored Volkswagen Beetle sits ready for tomorrow's filming, its engine purring perfectly, a testament to the power of combining experience with innovation, tradition with progress, and above all, two hearts that never stop believing in their shared dream.